Hello and welcome to the Time on Screen podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the host, and this is a Warner Mount podcast where we talk about the intersection of watches and film, and we discuss all sorts of movies on this podcast, and watch spotting, and the culture of watches and how it relates to film, and also time itself. Pretty loose discussion. We really just like to talk about movies here. I'm really happy to be joined today by Kyle Snar, head of partnerships at Warner.
I'm doing great.
How's it going?
I'm very, very, very excited to be talking about this movie today.
Yeah, so we are talking about The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou today. Wes Anderson's 2004 film starring Bill Murray and many other people. Kyle, I know this movie means a lot to you. You've described this movie not just as your favorite Wes Anderson movie, but as your favorite movie. So I might just kind of like let you cook on this podcast, because I know you have a lot to say about it, and I'm really excited to hear you talk about it, because it's part of the fun of doing a podcast like this is just hearing people's enthusiasm for movies. So but really great to finally be.
Yeah, I mean, my exact quote about this movie is that it's my all-time favorite movie of all time. That's what I call this movie. And for those of you who aren't seeing us right now, because it's really just you and me looking at each other here, Zach, but I am wearing my red cap, but I am not wearing a Speedo, but I am wearing pants, just to clearly say.
Okay, I'm grateful that you're wearing pants, just in case you need to stand up at some point, and we get because I'm watching you on video. So yeah, I'm glad you're wearing pants. You look like you're ready to set off on the Belafonte on any number of potentially dangerous adventures with Steve and his crew. So that's great. We're going to get into talking about the movie, obviously, in just a second. Before we do that, we do wrist checks. I'm going to go first because you have kind of a special watch to talk about today. I'm wearing my IWC Pilot's Chronograph 41 in Serotonin. Love this watch. I've been wearing it pretty consistently since I picked it up last year. No particular significance to The Life Aquatic that I can think of offhand, but Kyle, why don't you tell us what you're wearing?
So I picked up this watch a couple years ago, and it's one, I'll be honest, I don't wear that frequently, but it's I do wear it at least once a year on Halloween. But I am wearing the Vostok Amphibia reference number 420526S, and it's known even on the website as the Zissou. Yeah, so it's
very cool.
It's that cool. Kind of one of their more classic. I know they all have these different printed dials, and this one is, if you've seen it before, it has the helm, which is the big wheel from a ship, and an anchor illustrated on it, which is kind of feels a little campy and kind of perfect for this particular film, but. It's on a special rubber strap that you have to buy separately, which to match the strap that Steve Zissou and his crew wear in the actual film, which is also called the silicone strap Zissou 18 millimeter black. And so it's the classic 420 style of case. It's kind of a 39 to 40 millimeter case diameter, kind of in that range, but it's only 45.5 lug to lug, so if it sits really well and fits really well on pretty much anybody's wrist. It's got 18 millimeter lug width. It's got kind of a 14.7 millimeters thick, but you don't see that or feel that at all, because that's between the bubble domed acrylic crystal, and they break up the side of the case really, really well between kind of a protruding caseback and coin edge bezel. It's a really very, very, very wearable watch, and with a really fun, Vostok and Zissou history behind it.
Yeah. So, and also,
sub $100,
right? These watches are $100
by several dollars for sure. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's very cool. It's, definitely, I think, we talk about this whole podcast is about the connection between watches and movies, and this watch kind of is that connection to this movie. And if you're a big fan of this particular movie, or or any movie, spending like $80, $100 to kind of like deepen that connection in some ways seems like a very kind of like obvious thing to do. Like I think
like I said, it's a nice feels kind of like a bit of completionist kit for my oftentimes Halloween attire. Let's put it that way.
How many times? I don't want to put you on the spot. How many times have you dressed up as Steve Zissou
What are you talking about?
For Halloween?
I just go for it
every year. So that's your Halloween uniform every year. Okay. Good to know. I mean, it's a fun costume.
It's easy, it's fun, easy and colorful too. And we can talk about. I think color is going to be something we actually end up talking about today. But yeah, the watch is. It's just it's one of those things where people who know, and it is definitely telegraphs to other fans and fanatics are into it. So yeah,
sure. Yeah, I think it's cool too that it doesn't have the scuba dude on it. Like that's sort of like what everyone thinks of when they think of these, Vostok watches, and just the fact that it's a little bit different and has a different, dial design. I think
correct. Yeah, it doesn't have the scuba dude on the dial. However, they do sell a Steve Zissou caseback that you can have placed on the back, which has Bill Murray's face that is not etched but kind of almost printed on the case back of the watch. It's like a $10 upgrade or $11 upgrade, but you can get that added on the back. I did not do that. I didn't think that Steve Zissou had a picture of his face on the back of his watch, so why would I have one? But that's just me.
No, although maybe
seriously,
like maybe he would, like if he had the option of doing that. Can you buy the case back separately? Like it's just as a
like if I wanted to upgrade this to the Steve Zissou case back, it wouldn't be hard to do.
It'd just be a fun thing to have on your desk, I think.
Yeah. I've heard that there's a record of people on YouTube who have been wearing that case back with a lot of sunscreen on their wrist, and the printing doesn't fare very well with that kind of chemical reaction, apparently. Yeah, well, seriously.
You get what you pay for, I suppose. Okay, well that's great. So just to get into the movie here, obviously warning, as we always do with these podcasts, that we're going to be spoiling the movie. I think it's it's impossible to have a really deep discussion of this movie without talking about certain aspects of the ending. So if you haven't seen The Life Aquatic, maybe hold off on listening to this podcast until you've had a chance to watch it, because we will be talking about spoilers. And if you need a refresher, just a quick plot summary. The movie tracks Steve Zissou, who's a documentary filmmaker, kind of in the same vein as Jacques Cousteau. And the movie follows him after his best friend dies during the making of the start of the movie, his most recent film. And Zissou vows to avenge the shark that ate Esteban, his best friend and partner in filmmaking. And the movie tracks his attempt to do that, to find and kill the shark, and also as he deals with potentially maybe being a father. We are introduced to a character who believes he might be Zissou's son, and also following the kind of like adventures of his crew, his large crew, kind of a great cast of wonderful supporting actors, flesh out this movie. And it's really just kind of like I don't know, would you describe it as like kind of an adventure film, Kyle? Just, from one kind of like, literally the movie is like segmented into these like adventure segments.
Yeah, I put it in kind of two camps, honestly. Like I think most Wes Anderson movies fall into the camp of dramedy. Is kind of like they're all very emotional comedies mostly, and this is, we often hear about or look at like the drop down menu of action adventure movies, and this is definitely an adventure movie for sure. So this is like a dramedy meets adventure movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, I didn't quite get this the first time I saw the movie, and I'm going to ask you about your initial exposure to this movie in a minute here. But as I've rewatched this movie as I've gotten older, like I've really realized that it's very much it's really about death and like specifically the grieving process. Um, which is it's tough to sell a movie like that. And I think that might be one of the reasons why The Life Aquatic was kind of seen as it was a box office flop when it was released. And also critics kind of didn't really, didn't quite get it at first either. Because it's like, it does it deals with death, but it does it in in kind of like the same whimsical tone that we're used to from Wes Anderson. And it's just kind of hard to, wrap your arms around at first, but at the same time, like it gets better kind of as you watch it.
Did you see it when you were in a theater, or when did you first see it?
I saw this movie. I believe I saw this movie in a theater when it was initially released, and I remember
Mhm.
not really caring for it like too much when I initially saw it. But I had a conversation with a friend of mine, maybe like a year later, like when it came out on video, who told me to rewatch it. And kind of like think about it in a different way. And like it really started to click for me then, and it sort of like clicked for me in different ways. Um, Through the years as I've rewatched it. It's not like, for me personally, it's not like top tier Wes Anderson. I kind of like put it like in the middle of the pack of his of his filmography, but it's definitely I've grown an appreciation for it that I didn't have initially when I first.
Yeah, so
saw it. What was
if you
your
don't mind,
first
I'm going to
exposure?
just go back a little bit before it, because so when I was in college, Rushmore came out, and it was all the rage. Everyone was talking about it endlessly, and I kind of got turned off. It was like hyped so much that I kind of got turned off, and I never saw Rushmore. And then I was visiting my parents and here in New York City in December of 2021. And it was a really interesting time to be in the city. It was very emotional. It was right after 9/11. It was just a really unique and kind of somber place to be, and really kind of an interesting time just to be walking around New York City at Christmas time after that tragedy. And we kind of ran out of things to do, and we saw that the Royal Tenenbaums was in the theater, and so we rushed in to see it just on a whim. And I had just a completely incredible experience seeing Royal Tenenbaums in New York City with a packed audience in that kind of environment. We were all kind of there, and that too is kind of this whimsical but sad and emotional movie. And I connected with it, and I was just like instantly like, Royal Tenenbaums is like one of the best movies I've ever seen. And I went back and I watched Rushmore and I watched Bottle Rocket and loved them, and I was just like, I'm all in on Wes Anderson. Like, this is my guy. I just fell in love with his whole approach, and that can be cliche, I think, to be all in on Wes Anderson, but that was me, and I connected. So life circumstances happened. We had a kid, and I missed seeing Life Aquatic in theaters. I didn't see it in theaters. A few years went by,
Mhm.
and I was homesick from work one day and just nothing to do, just feeling lousy. So my wife went to Blockbuster, which existed at the time, and rented the Life Aquatic for me. So I was homesick, and I popped in Life Aquatic and I watched it. And to be honest, my first experience with it, especially with being such at that point a huge Wes Anderson fan and having high expectations, high hopes, and liking Bill Murray quite a bit, I watched it and I was like that did not resonate with me. It just didn't stick, and I felt kind of like you did,
Mhm.
like it's just missing something. But I had nothing to do, literally still sick, so I watched it a second time back to back. So I finished it and then watched it again because I felt like there was something I missed or something that didn't click, and it just didn't make sense for me given how much I loved Wes Anderson. So I rewatched it the second time, and I was like, oh, that was like way better. And I liked it a lot more on that second viewing. And so a few years later, the iPhone came out, and this was at a
Mhm.
time where I was traveling like crazy. I was flying every other week to different cities and stuff like that. And this was before the era of like everyone has a monitor in the back of the seat in front of them, So I purchased The Life Aquatic, and it was like for a while the only movie I had on like the first iPhone, you know. And so on flights, I watched The Life Aquatic, and I started realizing that every single time I watched this movie, not only did I see something that I had not seen before, I would also hear a line that I had ever heard before, and I liked it more.
Yeah.
And so I started rewatching this movie constantly over the years, and I was just shocked that I've never encountered a movie that had so much packed into it to such an insane degree that it requires. I mean, I've seen this movie dozens and dozens and dozens of times at this point in my life. And still, even rewatching it for this podcast,
Mhm.
I heard lines or saw things that I had not ever spotted before. And that kind of
Yeah.
depth and that kind of like attention to detail and just immense amount of visual content packed in, frame, like from corner to corner of the frame, and as deep and far back into the shot as you possibly can get. There's stuff happening way in the background if you pay attention to it. And then
Mhm.
just there's so much dialogue packed into this film, and there's really a lot of secondary jokes where you are laughing at a joke and missing the somewhat funnier joke that comes right after it because you're laughing at the first joke. So upon rewatch, you can pick up so much more dialogue than you can ever with a first viewing or even like 5 viewings. I mean, I don't know, dude. I tried to estimate how many times I've seen this movie, and I'm going to go ahead and say I've probably seen it close to 40 times, a lot. And I can honestly say that each and every time I see it, it's become that much better. And that's why I have to say it's my all-time favorite movie of all time. It just has stuck with me and spoken to me. So I'm going to take this one step further. Okay. So I was flying to LA on a business trip around a few years ago. And as I landed in LA and I'm walking up the jetway, at the top of the jetway, at the gate, I look ahead and I see Bill Murray welcoming people to Los Angeles. He's up there welcoming people, like, welcome to Los Angeles. Let me tell you where to go. And it was like, he's an eccentric guy.
He's an eccentric guy.
And
he's been known to, he's been known to
and so I'm like,
he
I'm
does
like
that.
so stoked, right? And so as I'm like walking up there, I have time to like figure out what I'm going to say to this guy. So as I approach Bill Murray, who's actually pretty tall, I was taller than I thought, approach him, I just say, "Hey, can I call you Steve Z?" And he, in his very Bill Murray-esque way, kind of closes his eyes and nods to me. "You can call me Steve Z." And, it's just like one of those amazing moments, and goes into this catalog. I don't know if you've heard of this, but like the catalog of quote unquote Bill Murray stories that follow this kind of almost mythical creature. There's a whole documentary all about Bill Murray stories that talk about the stuff he's done throughout the years, where he shows up at random college parties and does people's dishes, or he, serenades someone at their wedding, or he, just these amazing stories of just him showing up in random places and kind of doing his kind of yes and kind of comedic training and in all kinds of moments.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to our favorite, Bill Murray performances, but like that, like, I don't know if it's the way he lives his life that's kind of like influenced some of these later performances or the other way around. But like, it seems like there's less of a, like of a break between like the real Bill Murray and like Bill Murray on screen, like, over the last, like, say 20 years or so. So I'm really curious to get, towards the end of the podcast, we'll talk about our, what we think are the most iconic Bill Murray performances. That's a great story. It's very cool that you had your own kind of like Bill Murray experience. And also, like, I just want to point out, I think your reaction to the Life Aquatic coming off of Tenenbaums is like a very like common experience. Like, certainly describes my experience. I didn't see Tenenbaums in New York like you did, but I saw it during its initial theatrical run in 2001. I remember I saw it with a group of college friends when we were home on winter break, and they were kind of like similarly like into movies, as I was, and we all just loved it and immediately kind of like fell hard for it. And like that movie, I had seen Rushmore, but like that's the movie that kind of made me, I wouldn't say like Wes Anderson was my guy like after that, but like it made me want to like see every Wes Anderson movie after that. Like it really, Tenenbaums is just a masterpiece in my opinion, and we'll definitely do that movie, at a later date on this podcast, because I think there's a lot to talk about there. But yeah, no, like to your point, there are so many things to uncover in this movie on a rewatch. I think it really warrants like a detailed, discussion, on a podcast, and further study just in general. It's a great like closed captions movie. Wow. I watched it with closed captions like twice in the last week, and like you see so much like additional dialogue that
I've read the script before and was surprised. Like how have I never like heard this line? Even though it's clearly there. It's just like, yeah, it's a great read for sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you how familiar you are with the films of Noah Baumbach, because he, to me, is a like another kind of like central figure in this movie. He's the co-writer of the screenplay with Wes Anderson, and as I've rewatched Life Aquatic through the years and become more of a fan of Baumbach's over the years, I really see like some really key links between the themes of Life Aquatic with like kind of like Noah Baumbach's work in general. He's, to me, like the defining characteristic of Baumbach's work is he's very concerned with like this kind of like disappointment that men usually in his movies feel as they like approach.
I can associate with that.
Age.
Let me tell you.
They feel. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone to a certain extent probably can, especially as they get older. But that to me is like a central like element of the Life Aquatic. You're watching, Steve Zissou not only deal with the death of his friend, but also kind of, comparing himself to the Hennessy character played by Jeff Goldblum, who's great in this movie, and feeling inadequate, in his career and his life, and these questions around fatherhood. And it's very like emotionally complex. And I feel like, Wes Anderson has certainly dealt with those themes and, in the past, but Baumbach does it in like kind of a more grounded way, I think. And I think that really comes through.
I'm a big fan of his. I appreciate a ton of his work. I don't have the same kind of like childhood love of his work as I do about Wes Anderson movies. I mean, one of the things about that this movie really kind of made me feel like, as when I saw it the first few times, is that this movie made me feel like I wanted like a Lego set of the Belafonte with like the sub Jacqueline Deep Search, and the chopper, the whirlybird as they call it. And I wanted that. Noah Baumbach has some really fun and funny films that are hysterical and amazing, but very complex and deep. And then he also has some films that are not very funny and are very,
his movies veer towards the dark. I think it gets dark pretty quick.
Not my personal jam on that side of things, but I'm excited. I haven't seen White Noise yet, and I'm excited to see that.
Oh yeah, White Noise. So I've seen White Noise twice now. I saw it in the theater, and then I watched it when it started streaming on Netflix, and I liked it actually more the second time I saw it, watching it at home on my smaller like TV. It's really good, especially if you're a fan of the book, the Don DeLillo novel, which I admit I haven't read since probably just after college, which is almost 20 years at this point. So, but I have very fond memories of going through DeLillo's novels when I was younger, and the way that that book rather is adapted into a movie is very clever and creative and worth watching. And I think you might dig it because there's a lot of like nods to like 80s movies that I know you're a fan of. And it's surprisingly playful. It's like, it's dark in some ways, like Noah Baumbach movies tend to be, but it's also like kind of zany.
So it's on the watch list, man. I'm definitely gonna tackle it very soon. So cool.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So we got to talk about the watch spotting in this movie. We already discussed
from a specs point of view, we did. Yes.
Yeah. So we should get back into the Vostok a little bit. It's a dive watch. It's an affordable dive watch. I think it works really well. Seeing it on these characters in the movie, I love that they're all wearing it for the most part.
Team Zissou watch, along with your Glock, your red beanie, and your speedo.
You get Yeah, you get the Glock. Yeah. Do interns get?
I did not see any on the
Vostok?
interns. So interns don't get. They share a Glock, but they don't get a Vostok.
My favorite line in the movie is always,
Yeah.
it's like, do interns get a Glock? It's that just always makes me laugh. I wanted to just comment here as long as we're talking about the Vostok, that it really kind of like makes sense as the dive watch for this crew, in my mind, because the aesthetic of their whole operation is just sort of like kind of like run down and like kind of like pieced together and like held together with duct tape kind of kind of vibe. Just like every time you see the Belafonte, you see it as kind of this like falling apart old ship. And not that like Vostok is like a a bad watch that's falling apart, but like it's $100 dive watch. It's the kind of thing that you would maybe buy on the cheap if you were Steve Zissou and needed your team to have an inexpensive watch. It doesn't make sense that they would have like Rolexes or Doxes.
Yeah, I mean,
like
let's be honest. Steve Zissou is bargain bin Jacques Cousteau. That's kind of like who he is. And so you're right.
Yeah.
Like whatever Doxa or Blancpain that Jacques Cousteau is wearing. I mean, what is the more bargain bin issue of that? And this kind of checks that box, and it's an amazing choice if you think about it, that amount of detail was thought through in terms of what the actual costuming of each character was. Because one of the things that you learn, and you can see it in the film, but if you have to really pay attention, but they did talk about it in the making of this movie, is that every single uniform of the crew is pretty patchwork. It's bespoke. They all have a similar aesthetic. It's a red cap. It's like a light blue shirt, light blue pants with like dark navy blue accents. But every single piece of people's apparel and uniform is not really kind of like made in mass. It's all just like pieced together to kind of like fit this general aesthetic. I mean, granted, they all have they do all wear the standard issue Adidas Zissou sneakers, which do come. We see a big box arrive of those in the film, complete with his official Zissou exercise, which no one else on the planet does but him and his crew and his interns. But yeah, it's every single wetsuit that they wear is a different color, but all kind of close to each other. So you're right. It's like this piecemeal kind of put together crew that is absolutely the bargain bin version of the Calypso and Jacques Cousteau's crew.
Yeah, and it stands in contrast with when you see them, the Hennessy crew. Like those are my favorite kind of like visual jokes in the movie. This movie's full of obviously of sight gags, and my favorite ones kind of involve the those class differences between like the crew of the Belafonte versus
another fun note and nod to bargain Jacques Cousteau is Jacques Cousteau's ship was the Calypso, and Harry Belafonte is like one of the most famous Calypso singers in the world, and so of course, Steve's ship is named the Belafonte.
And so something else that a little detail that's worth mentioning here is that there's a moment in the movie where Zissou mentions Cousteau by name. So like he probably did that intentionally. I'm guessing, naming his ship the Belafonte. That's a connection that he probably would have like recognized like in the real life of this movie, where Jacques Cousteau is like, obviously he's a real person who existed, but in the fantasy world of this movie, he's also
if you don't mind, I'd like to actually share that quote because it's my favorite quote from the movie. He says this. He says, supposedly Cousteau and his cronies invented the idea of putting walkie-talkies into the helmet, but we made ours with a special rabbit ear on top so we could pipe in some music. And so the backstory with that is, because of the aesthetic and a lot of different things that were really kind of treading in the world of Jacques Cousteau. Wes Anderson and his producers had to get special permission from the Cousteau Society to to kind of do a lot of the things that they're set out to do, and reference him in this way. Apparently, just kind of a funny note that I've learned over the years too is that permission slip, kind of other than how it's used in the final cut of the film, has been expired, and so they can't actually make any more references to Jacques Cousteau without paying them from here on out. But so they did get, and you can see in the actual credits they certainly give a big thanks and shout out to Jacques and crew.
Yep. I mean, the movie is heavily in debt to Cousteau's films and his overall aesthetic. Like it's impossible not to.
Well, and when we get to kind of like maybe what doesn't work about this film a little further down in our notes here, like I'll point out an experience I had that kind of can be kind of a black eye to this if you look at it certain ways. So,
sure. Yeah. Before we do that, we need to talk about the other key watch in this movie, and that's the watch worn by Ned, Owen Wilson's character, the maybe not son of Steve Zissou. It's a Rolex GMT Master 2 reference, 16710. You see it very clearly throughout the movie. It's it's pilot's watch. The character is a pilot, so
a waterproof pilot
makes a lot of sense.
Dive rated.
Yep, he needs it certainly at certain points in the movie. What do you make of this?
It's funny. He flies for Air Kentucky, right? And there are certainly some very Pan Am vibes going on. He arrives in his uniform with a little kind of bit of like a shoulder bag luggage like thing with the Air Kentucky emblem on it, and it definitely reeks of 1950s and 60s Pan America style, which, the history of the good old GMT Master 2 is that, they wasn't not to like help with Pan Am put a lot of like thought into helping them develop this for their pilots. So I think there's the connections here are intentional, they're heavy, and it's the perfect watch for this character, especially given that he's going from the air to the sea, even though he mentions very quickly, I'm not even that good of a swimmer. And then he does, as Steve says, swallows a bit of water. But it's interesting because like Owen Wilson, then from this time in his career, he goes on to wear this same reference in at least 2 other films, which is obviously either A, this was his watch to begin with, or B, he loved it so much from this shoot that it just stayed on his wrist afterward. And the exact same reference is seen in Wedding Crashers, and then a movie called The Big Year in like as recent as 2011. So that's kind of a cool thing. Where obviously this became something of an attachment for Owen Wilson. And then no spoilers, but he actually does wear another reference of Rolex GMT in a different Wes Anderson movie after this one. So, he wears it in the Darjeeling Limited. He wears of course, it has the green arrow hand, but the black dial.
Okay, so a modern GMT then in Darjeeling. Interesting. Yeah, so I think. I love the idea of an actor just wearing his own watch in a movie. Just kind of like, to me, lends a certain amount of authenticity to the movie if it's if the watch fits. And I think that in the case of a Rolex GMT, there's like a certain kind of like generic like nature to it. Like it works in just about any situation, but like it's specific enough as a pilot's watch that it makes a lot of sense for Ned.
Totally. And, even though he's young in his career, I mean, he says very clearly he just came into some money with his mother's passing. Who knows if that was a purchase he made or if it was even that expensive of a watch at that time. That is one thing that's funny about this movie is it is a timeless film. Like, who knows when this is actually occurring? Everything feels dilapidated, but it could be present day, also. So it's nice to have a timeless timepiece as like a key feature in this film.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's one of the things I love about Wes Anderson movies is that they kind of like they all sort of exist out of time. For the most part. Um, I like that they kind of like they take place in this kind of like alternate dimension, almost. That's just completely of Wes Anderson's making. It's one of the reasons he's been so successful. He's like he really kind of like has carved out this like this niche, and how he kind of like builds these worlds. Like he's better at that than almost any modern filmmaker, I think.
Well, yeah, this is a great.
Yeah.
All in all, this is a great watch movie for sure. It puts those watches through their paces and on an adventure that's like meant to line up with why these watches exist.
Yeah, 100%. I want to run through some key scenes, some scenes that kind of like make this movie for you. The ones maybe that you keep coming back to. Do you have a favorite scene that
sure?
I mean,
I have a lot, so I don't know how to trim it down for you, buddy. But I definitely.
That's okay, man. You could just
okay.
Just go for it. What's the first one that comes to mind?
I really like the montages in general in this movie, and the training sequence is the one that leads up to the moment when when Owen Wilson does go in for his first dive and needs to be resuscitated. But that training montage is a classic for me. I love the music.
It's great.
We can get into the music a little bit about this movie, but the training montage is just perfect because it just gets you amped up for this adventure. I always love a good kind of like getting equipped, getting ready for the adventure sort of moment in a movie. When the movies skip that, I think it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. I love that scene too. It kind of becomes like a little like sports movie, like for a minute. It's really great. And then, like you said, the music really, really makes it. Something I want to point out about this movie is and we sort of touched on it earlier, but it has these like amazing like action sequences that like to me are kind of the what I always like kind of think about when I'm rewatching this movie is I think about the like the scope of this movie is so much larger than anything Anderson had done before, particularly the scene, the pirate scene where the pirates kind of take the Belafonte, and then a short time after that where Zissou and his crew are kind of like raiding the pirate compound, which is an old abandoned hotel
Citron
on an island. Hotel Citron, that's right. Just like really like well staged, surprisingly effective action movies. In 2004, I wouldn't have suspected that that Wes Anderson, who had just made like 3 like indie movies, with no action scenes, that could have staged these kind of like large scale very kind of effective action / comedy scenes, but really heavy on the action.
It's interesting. I was lucky to go to the little art house cinema in my town a few years ago and see the commentator Matt Zoller Seitz speak. He spoke on
he's great.
The Grand Budapest Hotel, but he talked about this movie in that setting, and he talked about how this a nod to another podcast you and I love. This was Wes Anderson's blank check movie, and he went and he spent a ton of money, more money on this movie than he has spent on any of his other films. There's a quote in the movie where, it's describing Steve as his most ambitious venture to date. Well, this was Wes Anderson's most ambitious venture to date. And 2 things happened. One, he went way over budget and needed to get more money, and he went way over schedule. And for him, those were 2 things that had never happened to him before. And he seriously disliked that happening, and has since then has never gone over budget or over schedule again. And kind of like this was a big turning point for him in his career, just to think, I'm going to do things on my term that are doable rather than outside of my realm of possibilities. Because in this film, he bought a naval destroyer, and that's actually out there on the water for all these scenes. He shot in Italy on location for all these scenes. And you can tell that there is a degree of realism, even though there's some very surreal things happening throughout this movie, which we can get to. This movie is like legit. Like there are tons of moments where you can see that when they're on Steve's island and they're having a discussion through the window, you see the actual ship, the Belafonte, anchored offshore, and it's in the frame. Like he put that camera in a spot where you can see stuff going on the ship in the background through a window. And that degree of like detail and scope is, I don't know of another movie that in the modern era where so much is accomplished with green screens and in studio and with CG and all that stuff. You have to go back to like really kind of epic filmmaking of like the 60s and 50s and 60s to see that kind of like in camera grandeur kind of captured. And they shot on the widest kind of film format possible to get that kind of CinemaScope like old cinema vibe throughout this film, because it is epic and it is adventurous, and it's so much of it actually is done in camera.
Yeah. I mean, the only real like comparison is are the movies that Wes Anderson would make later, you know, like I'm thinking of movies like The French Dispatch and French Dispatch is kind of stuck in my mind because I literally just watched it, but like it has the same sort of like there's a lot of practical effects, you know, in The French Dispatch. There's a lot of like on location shooting, you know, in that film, and there's so much to look at, and it, you know, it's kind of like, you know, all his movies are kind of like cousins of each other, but like, you know, like he's the only filmmaker, you know, working today who is just cramming the frame with so much detail, and you can really see, you know, whether the budget's small or large, you can see it all
and that's what
screen,
I think regardless. The magic of this movie that makes it so infinitely rewatchable is that you can go back to it time after time after time again and see just look a layer back from where the main characters are speaking to each other, and you see a whole nother movie happening back there. So
Yep. Another scene that sticks out to me, kind of a you know, sort of a similar scene to the training montage, is that the famous diorama scene. Or it's really just one unbroken shot where Steve is giving Ned, but also the viewer, obviously, a tour of the Belafonte in cross section, and you see, you know, all the different, like, you know, rooms that are set aside for filmmaking, essentially, and just kind of like the strange like stuff that is included, just like just total like Wes Anderson whimsical stuff, like the moon room where, you know, the dolphins kind of, you know, swim around, and you can you know, see the ocean, like the, you know, from the you know, from the hull of the ship. It's just it's really clever. I feel like that's the sort of scene or sequence rather, that would get kind of like so lampooned later on by people who like,
or just commercials trying
like too cute
to recapture that magic that he had, that's been used, aped who knows how many times.
I love that. It kind of you know, that's something I remember seeing in the theater and just kind of being blown away. It really works well on a big screen, you know, when you see the ship cut in half, like that. And then the other scene that sticks out to me, and I'm sure sticks out to you, is the big ending sequence where you know, Ned has died in a you know, a helicopter accident, and they finally get a read on the Jaguar Shark, and you have this big emotional payoff where they're all in the, you know, the little submersible, and they come across the Jaguar Shark, and it's this like incredibly beautiful creature made with, you know, the same type of stop motion animation techniques that we had seen previously throughout the film, and the Sigur Rós music kicks in, and it's just this big like cathartic moment, and it's a little bit corny. Like, I think like it's you know, it's okay to admit that, but it also, I think, like it works in the context of the movie.
I can't not tear up as many times as I've seen this movie during that sequence. I don't know why, but it just, like, you're right, it is so cathartic, and the music has a lot to do with it. I'll be honest, that Sigur Rós song it really does a great job of capturing that moment. And it just feels like, I don't know, just like a nice cozy blanket after all you've been through. It kind of just really kind of lets you sit down and relax in it all and kind of let it wash over you. And I always tear up, like I said, every time. So I love that. I love that moment for sure.
Yep. It's really well done. Any other?
I mean, I want to talk about just the opening sequence too. Like this film opens in a screening of, or the premiere of his latest TV episode, but it's really treated like kind of like a film premiere in this grand, black tie event, in this grand cinema. And for me, the thing that always cracks me up is whenever I've gone to like, a Sundance premiere or anything like that, at the beginning of like the Q&A section, right when someone asks the first question, you see a couple get up. You always see a couple people get up and bail, like right at that moment, which is totally captured here. But I think it's a great way to start this movie off. It's a great opening sequence. It really does put you in the world immediately, and it's funny. But it's also like sets the stakes for the film too.
Yeah, because you get that, like the thing that always sticks out to me in that opening sequence is the Estebans Death captured in in like the film within a film, and Bill Murray just like screaming, for Esteban, and it's like, it's not funny, like it's not played for laughs, like it's really, like it's the death of his best friend. It's like, it's serious, and like it kind of sets this like this kind of like somewhat darker tone for the rest of the movie, that even in Tenenbaums, which is also like it deals with death and serious family trauma, this is kind of like in a different league than that. And that could have been one of the reasons why this movie like didn't like work for a lot of people in 2004 when they saw it, is just because it kind of like was not meeting the expectations of people who were like big Rushmore.
I mean, that is a very serious moment, and it's not played for laughs, but there are so many good lines and jokes that happen during that. I do love the sequence between Steve and Klaus, where he goes, Esteban was eaten. And Klaus is like, bitten? He's like, no, eaten. He's like, you mean chewed? He's eaten, like, eat, like swallowed whole, and I mean, that sounds awful. And it's like a dark topic, but it's hysterically played out against this traumatic thing, which I love that contradiction. I love that dichotomy, and what makes it a true dramedy, right? The one thing I want to just, I don't know how you want me to do this. I can do this lightning fast, but if there are a lot of little details that pop up in this that make it infinitely rewatchable, and I'd love to just rattle off a few that I found over the years that I think are hysterical and cool. So in that opening sequence where there's a fan of Steve Zissou, who right after the premiere is trying to chase him down and get him to sign a bunch of posters. This old guy who he eventually just tells him, hey, just go sign them yourself. Like, But that guy can be seen in the background of multiple shots well before he ever encounters Steve. He's just hiding around back there, lurking, making his way closer and closer.
I noticed that too,
I love Anne-Marie Sakowitz, who is the script girl, is often seen sunbathing topless throughout the film. In the sequence where she and some of the crew are manning the bar at the party on the boat, she's wearing a sheer top. It's just like a funny, like funny little note to like this gal that barely ever wears a shirt. And she also is running with the rest of the crew on the beach topless when they're during the training montage. Also on that same sequence, Steve, who is not running with the crew, is riding a bicycle. And he chases down Owen Wilson, who's going to, meet up with Cate Blanchett's character. And when he pulls up on his bike, there's a basket on the front of the bike with a Glock holster next to it, which is just hysterical. When you...
I can't believe, by the way, this is the first time you've mentioned Cate Blanchett's name.
She's a rock star in this.
In
we have to talk.
She's very
when
good.
You're seeing, when they're sitting around watching the old episodes of the TV show as the crew, flanking both sides of the television set are Steve Zissou and crew action figures. So Team Zissou action figures, like from the 80s looking things, are sitting on the side of each of those. And then one of my favorites is, you mentioned the Operation Hennessy team and how incredibly dialed they are and stuff like that. When one of the crew members from Operation Hennessy is looking through his binoculars, they're actually Luke Skywalker's binoculars from Star Wars. And even when we see the readout of that he's seeing through the lenses, it's the exact same readout that Luke has in Star Wars when he's like scanning the horizon for R2-D2. And there's dozens. And
Wes Anderson is a noted Star Wars fanatic, so like that's
and there's dozens and dozens
nice
more of these kind of like little hidden Easter eggs and different little levels of depth throughout the whole film. So it's just a lot of fun to continue to rewatch and spot these little homages, or there's this extra little bit of decor or dialogue or prop that just really kind of brings this movie to life.
Yeah, no, there are tons of great sight gags, in the film, and that's again one of the one of Wes Anderson's trademarks is just like stuffing the frame full of like so many things to look at. It really just does make the movie really rewarding, watching it over and over again. Something else that I know you wanted to talk about is the music in the movie. Music is very important, obviously, in just about every Wes Anderson movie. Both the scores and the needle drops, the popular music that's like kind of inserted into the movie. And this movie also features a character who is frequently playing music and singing. That's I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Su Jorge, I believe.
Yeah. So I think it's Seu Zorze, because he's
okay. So he's singing David Bowie songs in Portuguese, throughout the movie, and he had kind of like a moment of, pretty viral, internet fame after this movie came out. There are a lot of people listening to. I think they released these songs as an album, and like he was, became quite popular for a time, deservedly so. I think he's a talented guy, and this is, I don't know if you're aware, this is the first Wes Anderson movie not to feature a Rolling Stones song in the film, but just always enjoyable to kind of like catch the needle drops. I'm partial to the Search and Destroy being played during the pirate attack, specifically, when Bill Murray is
retaliating,
like the cat retaliating.
Also a very good
pirates. That's my personal favorite
Guitar Hero song, Search and Destroy. Just gonna say it.
Yeah.
I think
Love the Stooges.
That's, you asked me, in our notes here, who would be my favorite, who's my favorite crew member. And I think it has to be Pele, who's played by Zissou. Cause like having him serenading you the whole time on this is just perfect. I think it was, actually James Stacey in the good old Grenado podcast who pointed out that actually having that character in the crew is actually an homage to another documentary of the time, which is called Blue Water White Death, which came out in I think 1971.
Sure.
Where that captain / director of that film included a folk singer in his crew as well to help pass the time.
Yeah, and they have that's part of the Belafonte is outfitted with a little mini recording studio so that Pele can record his songs. And I love that Bowie's music is featured prominently. In this movie, there's a great Life on Mars needle drop in the beginning of the film. It's great. His movies are always filled with music. Wes Anderson has great taste in music, and you're always kind of exposed to something, maybe that you haven't heard in a while when you throw on.
Yeah, if you go onto good old Spotify, there's like also playlists people put together that's like music inspired by Wes Anderson style tracks. Those are always good to put on once in a while for sure.
Yeah. Yep. So what is it? I know this is your favorite movie, but talk about some of the things that you think don't work too well. You have a note in our outline here about Ned's death.
It's interesting when you look at kind of the narrative arc of Steve Zissou. He's already kind of made his switch as a character. You want a character to, he starts off as kind of a scumbag. Like he's not a great character. He's not a great person, I should say. He's kind of awful to a lot of people, especially Cate Blanchett's character throughout the film. And by the time you get to the point in the film where his character has kind of made the change and becomes a better person. Like after that is when Owen Wilson's character ends up getting killed in this accident. And it seems like a weird spot to put it. And it never just sat with me very well. It's always kind of a little shocking and disturbing because it was after he made that kind of change in his life, it seemed like. What made it worse for me, though, is when I had finally kind of watched one of Jacques Cousteau's documentaries called Voyage to the Edge of the World. And you realize that that's just a cold lift from something that happens to a very cool character on his, not character, but crew member on his boat in this particular documentary, that it's a helicopter accident. Like, spoiler alert, it's a helicopter accident that kills one of his members of his crew. And that just felt very like, I know that Wes Anderson is really, 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 really good at like just remaking what a lot of things he loves about movies are, into his films. I mean, there's a whole sequence in the Grand Budapest Hotel that he cold lifts from like Alfred Hitchcock, right? But this was a hard thing for me to for him to like see happen in real life and then try and recreate it in this movie. It's never settled with me well, and it kind of gives this movie a little bit of a black eye for me, despite it being my favorite.
Yeah, it's an interesting like storytelling choice, because I don't know that you need to kill Ned to have
Esteban's already died. It's just like
right. If the movie is about Steve kind of coming to terms with his grief and going through that grieving process, I think you can do that without killing the character who he thinks at the time is his son. And then there's this open question of whether or not he is his son. According to another character in the movie, he quote unquote shoots blanks, so he couldn't be his son. So I agree with you. I think that it's kind of it's an interesting choice. I think that it allows us to see that he's like, in that last sequence, he's bonded with Ned regardless of whether he's his son, and he's kind of learned to to accept him as part of his family, and that's like some character growth on Steve's part, but it's not like directly related to his grieving process, at least not in a way that I can cleanly identify.
Yeah, totally. And then the other thing that sticks out to me from time to time is, and we should just talk about it real quick, is like the use of stop motion. Obviously, he did it on purpose to go very stylized stop motion, so he didn't have to compete with the amazing real underwater photography and cinematography that was happening at that time. So he's like, let's just go hyper stylized and make up, crayon ponyfish and all these different, animals that don't exist. Exactly, like
creatures that don't exist.
But and I love it in like that the tiger shark moment and other underwater moments. But sometimes it pulls me out. It just sometimes doesn't really land for me. But I forgive it like all the time, because it led him to doing things like the Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I absolutely adore. So if that's what it took to get there, I'll take it. Do you like the stop motion?
Yeah, no. I think it's fine. I'm kind of neutral on it. I think that it's obviously like a part of filmmaking that he's fascinated with, and he clearly had a desire to kind of like work that into this movie and to do more with it later. And as you point out, in Fantastic Mr. Fox and in Isle of Dogs as well, I think he genuinely is interested in animation, and was just like, as you said, this is a blank check movie. He's kind of like trying everything he can, throwing as much money at the screen as possible. And I think that was just that was part of that experience probably for him on this movie.
Yeah, totally.
So you had asked me, heading into this recording to identify our top, Bill Murray iconic performances, and so I want to spend the last kind of moments of this podcast kind of going through our lists. Do you want to talk a little bit about like kind of like what Bill Murray like means to you? Because I think he probably, and we talked about this a little bit, he probably means more to you than he does to me. I'm not like the biggest Bill Murray fan. When I think of like the late 70s, early 80s comedies, the ones I really still gravitate to are the ones made by his contemporaries. Like I'm a big Fletch fan, and like I'm like just Chevy Chase in general, and like Steve Martin, and other people who kind of worked in the same circle as him. I prefer them usually to Bill Murray. But yeah, he's a pretty big figure.
Yeah, and I would say my love of Bill Murray comes later. I wasn't into him in the 80s either. I wasn't even allowed to see Ghostbusters as a kid because my mom wouldn't let me watch ghost movies. So no Beetlejuice, no Ghostbusters, no Poltergeist. Yeah. But I think in the 90s, there's a couple movies that I don't want to spoil my list here that I think were really impactful for me from a comedy, just like comedic performance point of view. And then I really just loved this era where he became besties with Wes Anderson and really settled into being in all his movies in one way or another. And then I'm a huge fan of like Lost in Translation, and just the way his performances can be hysterical and very, very, very serious all at once. And there's very few actors who can balance a serious performance with that much comedy baked in, and he just does it masterfully.
Yeah. So how do you want to go through these lists, Kyle? Do you want to go from 5 to 1 and alternate? Okay.
I'm going with
what's
Bob
your number
Wiley
5?
in 1991's What About Bob? Formulative in terms of just
movie.
like comedic performance and just zaniness, and great introduction at that age for me of who and what, Bill Murray was.
Yep. I love What About Bob. That's on my list as well.
Right.
A little bit higher up. So that's probably like the Bill Murray movie from like my childhood that like resonates the most. I can remember seeing that at a pretty young age, and I go back and rewatch it from time to time. It's wonderful. It's a really like genuinely hilarious movie, and like the interplay between him and Richard Dreyfuss in that movie, like a very angry Richard Dreyfuss.
I don't know if it holds up, but
great.
what's your number 5?
My number 5 is Steve Zissou from The Life Aquatic. I think kind of like rewatching this movie a couple times in the last week to prep for this podcast, kind of like cemented this as his key.
I agree. Yeah, there's
Wes
other
Anderson
great ones.
role,
Mine's a little higher up, obviously, but there's amazing performance, especially Rushmore. His performance in Rushmore is all-time classic, but this is his Wes Anderson role.
Yep, 100%.
I put again, I'm not
4?
the hugest Caddyshack fan, but his role in terms of iconic roles, I think Carl Spackler in Caddyshack is just everyone at that time thought he was the funniest man on the planet, and I think that goes into one of his most iconic for sure. All right.
We share number 4. That's my number 4 as well. I love Caddyshack. When I go back and rewatch Caddyshack, like the Chevy Chase stuff is what I laugh at most, but that like that iconic Bill Murray, like insane monologue, like towards the end, the Dalai Lama speech. It's just like one of the funniest things, in any movie ever. It's great. Caddyshack is an all-time classic. Definitely worth rewatching over and over again. So my number 3 is Bob Wiley and What About Bob? So we've already kind of covered that. So what's
I didn't grow up as a big Ghostbusters fan, but my wife did, and she assured me that Dr. Peter Venkman from the Ghostbusters franchise is absolutely an iconic role of Mr. Murray.
Can I tell you? I'm gonna. You can DM me. Listeners, if you need to. I'm not a Ghostbusters fan. I've tried. Like I just can't. I can't do it. I don't find the jokes funny. The special effects are really, really dated. I tried rewatching the original Ghostbusters a couple days ago, just kind of in preparation for this podcast, because I knew we were going to be talking about Bill Murray, and I thought I'll give this a spin. It's streaming on HBO Max right now.
That's all good.
I couldn't make it through.
I'm with you, man. It's all good. But I'm putting it there. My wife said it has to be there, so I'm putting it there. What's your? Okay, you put Bob. You put Bob Wiley. Got it.
Yeah. So Bob was my number 3. Bob is also my number 2 because number 2 is Bob Harris.
It was a that was a fight for number 5 for me between those two. I love Lost in Translation. Like I said, it's one of my roles that kind of brought me back to Bill Murray as like, man, this might be my all-time favorite actor, you know? And, but what do you love about Bob Harris?
Well, I love this movie in general because I just think it's just a really beautiful film. Sofia Coppola, directed film. Another Bill Murray film with great music, really fantastic Kevin Shields score, and there's something like just really kind of like romantic and sad about Lost in Translation that I love. And this is sort of what I was referring to when I was talking about that line between like modern Bill Murray performances and Bill Murray in real life, kind of like seeping into one another, because like he just kind of like appears, to Scarlett Johansson's character in this movie in this hotel, and like I think of that karaoke scene, and it's just he's really I don't know, it's a wonderful performance, very like free spirited, kind of performance, and I love the movie. It's one of my favorite movies made in the last like 30 years.
I think in terms of my only challenge was putting on this list is I don't know how iconic that performance is as opposed to just an amazing performance, but like I'm with you. I love him in that movie, and I love that film as well.
Yeah.
Well, my
okay.
number
What's your number
2,
one?
which I haven't. Yeah, my number 2.
Oh, sorry. Skip your number 2. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is Steve Zissou in The Life Aquatic. It's not number 1. I think, this is, like we've already said, this is his quintessential Wes Anderson performance, and it fits into my number 2. So I'm going to go out on a venture that we both share a number 1.
Okay. Well, my number 1 is another movie. So again, I don't know how iconic the performance is. Maybe we do share it, or maybe not. I'm not sure. But number 1 is Phil Connors from Groundhog Day.
Yes. Here we are.
Great. I'm glad we found some common ground. I love Groundhog Day. It's just like an absolutely hysterical kind of like existential crisis movie. Like I really I think there's like a lot to kind of like pull out of that movie in terms of like the philosophy of it. Like it's far deeper than I think anyone initially gave it credit for, and that's one of the reasons this sort of has endured over the course of time. But there's this like hilarious performance at the center of it.
Phil,
it's great.
Connors, Phil, is that you? Yes, like it is iconic in every sense of the word, and it is. And I'll go out on a limb and just say it's a perfect movie. It's a perfect film. It's also infinitely rewatchable in a funny meta way. But like, yes, it's easily in one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. But in terms of iconic performances, I think it's Bill Murray's most iconic.
Yeah. It's great. Bill Murray's had a hell of a career. It's just a lot of great roles. Many Wes Anderson films among them, and potentially more. Wes Anderson has 2 movies out later this year, Kyle. I don't know if you're aware of that. Asteroid City and a movie based on a Roald Dahl book. The name escapes me right now. We'll put it in the show notes. The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. Awesome. Just found it. So both of these movies due to come out later this year. I think we'll be talking about Wes Anderson and as the year goes on this podcast, because there are movies in the Wes Anderson's filmography that I respond to even more than the Life Aquatic, and we should talk about those because I know they're favorites of yours as well, and hopefully they're favorites of the listeners, because we're
going back to the well here, the West well
into it. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on to talk about the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Kyle, this has been a great conversation, and thank you all for listening. If you like the show, be sure to go ahead and leave us a review, like, subscribe, all that stuff on Worn and Wound's YouTube channel, Instagram, all the social medias. We're on all of them. So join us there, and we'll see you next time.
This is an adventure.
Time on Screen. Thanks.